Hello, welcome everybody to our September series, September version of our Land and Wildlife Speaker Series. My name is Luke Macaulay. I'm the Wildlife Management Specialist for University of Maryland Extension, and I'm excited to have you all on today on a topic that I think is really important for Maryland, really important for wildlife. One of what I would say one of the top two or three, I think, lowest hanging fruits to improve wildlife habitat in our state. Today's speakers are Dr. Stacy Small-Lorenz here on the left and Lisa Kuder. They are both extension specialists with the University of Maryland Extension, and they both have overlapping interests. I thought, gosh, both of them could give this talk. So I thought, well, let's just see if we can do a 15 minutes of from each of them. Each of them is going to cover their own sort of angles on this topic of how to design your landscaping for less mowing and more wildlife. So I'm very happy and to have both of them joining us today. And I will stop my screen share and let Stacy start. Dr. Small-Lorenz.
Hi, Luke. Hi, Lisa, and welcome everybody. I'm really honored to be here. It's a really exciting webinar series. And I'll be talking about some of the things that I emphasize in my program, residential landscape ecology. Lisa and I both just passed our 1 year mark. So it's really exciting to be able to share some of what we've been working on and some of the training we've been delivering.
Time flies. Can't believe it's been a year.
I know, right? I just want to take a moment to remind everybody of our university inclusion statement that university programs, activities, and facilities are available to all without regard to race, color, sex, gender identity, or expression, sexual orientation, marital status, age, national origin, political affiliation, physical or mental disability, religion, protected veteran status, genetic information, personal appearance, or any other legally protected class. And we're very glad that you have joined us here today. So my learning objectives, I've got a couple for this part of the presentation, is that participants will be able to integrate ecological and design considerations into their ecological landscaping plan. And that participants will be able to evaluate ecological site conditions and the surrounding landscape in order to design a landscape plan that sustains ecological function and biodiversity while maximizing ecosystem services like stormwater management, pollination, pest control, and carbon sequestration. I just want to start with a little warm up and give everybody an opportunity to just imagine a landscape where you might have a design dilemma, might be a project you're working on, might be your own landscape. And just think about what is a particular design dilemma that you have. And Lisa and I both talk a lot about native plants. They're really a central focus in both of our programs. Because native plants, they play a really important role in solving a lot of landscape design challenges, stormwater management, invasive species, pest control, enhancing unsightly features, organizing space, while also supporting higher biodiversity. And that's really our, ultimate outcome. So what's your design dilemma? If you want to share, what you're working on in the chat box, you're welcome to do so.
Yeah, so feel free to jump on in there and type anything in the chat, and I will relay those back to Stacy. I'm sure she's busy looking at her, thinking about her talk. So, Stacy, if I see
Yeah,
good things come in, I'll jump in that's relevant
I
for you.
I love hearing about the types of challenges and projects that our audience members are working on. So that would be
Cool.
great.
Yeah.
So be sure to take some time to identify your priorities so you can really focus your efforts into something that has some real meaningful outcomes. So it could be socializing play spaces, privacy screens, stormwater management, property value, biodiversity. It's hard to cover it all, but if you could really identify your 2 or 3 key priorities, it can really help you to focus. So in the projects that I'm sharing today, I'm really focusing on increasing biodiversity, stormwater management, and erosion control. So I'll share some examples toward the end of my talk of some projects I'm developing.
Stacy, it's great you said erosion control. We've got a bunch of things jumping in the chat, and one of the first ones was steep slope erosion, and I know you're going to cover that. That'll be great. A lot of things
Yeah, I'm
about
glad to hear.
wildlife, groundhogs, rabbits, chipmunks, squirrels, eating my perennials, deer,
Okay.
deer, deer, ticks.
So-
Um,
Sacrificial hostas.
yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Biodiversity and not messing up. I think you're going to cover that great. And more deer, stormwater management. This is all great stuff. So I think you're going to have a great one.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
will have to give my talk on managing deer damage on this webinar
Yeah.
soon, it sounds like.
I'll be in the front row for that. We get so many questions about deer. So for your design challenge, maybe it's helpful to think about what is a something that you would like to enhance. Maybe it's the street view, unsightly trash cans, an ugly fence, bright lights. These are all real examples right from my neighborhood. But make note of those features that you want to enhance, emphasize, or conceal, or other challenges like erosion spots, wet areas that are difficult to mow, where you've got invasive plants, and figure out where your target areas and so that you can develop a phased restoration plan. So, um, being mindful of those erosion areas, those are really high priority areas to start in. And so these are different stages of erosion, specifically water erosion, splash erosion. A lot of people don't even realize that that's a form of erosion, but that's where it starts. It's from the action of raindrops falling and spattering. Then sheet erosion, becomes real erosion, can form gullies, and even here's an example of bank erosion. So, designing a restoration plan that addresses these erosion areas can give you um, more bang for your buck. You're solving an erosion issue, you've got water quality benefits, um, and you're maintaining, restoring your soil while creating habitat. So, the project I'll show you, I had to be very mindful of not creating an erosion problem because I decided I wanted to do planting in a drainage swale. So starting by, doing a general assessment of your ecosystem, understanding the landscape context, just a simple search on Google Earth to get a sense of what's in the surrounding landscape, going out and ground truthing, visiting some of those areas, realizing some of what you're going to be encountering is probably highly disturbed. You'll see invasive plants, but having a general idea, like, are you embedded in a forest, woodland, shrubland, grassland, meadow ecosystem, wetland, stream, or riparian, or what type of ecosystem are you trying to emulate that will be appropriate for our ecoregion in your specific locality? Also, understanding the history of your landscape can be beneficial. So, also understanding that Maryland has a wide array, high diversity of dominant forest community types. So, taking a little time to, examine some of this type of documentation and understanding historically, what is the forest cover type that would be appropriate in your area, as well as riparian zones. So you, just by looking at this map, this is where riparian forests are absent that should be there. So if you in your neighborhood, you've got an area that is missing riparian cover or it's compromised, that's an area where you can get a lot of bang for your buck, in terms of erosion control, stormwater management, and habitat. These are tend to be extremely biologically rich areas that have benefits for the aquatic species, the aquatic ecosystem, as well as terrestrial ecosystems. So I'm really focusing on this talk on just overall enhancing overall biodiversity. So rather than developing an endangered species management plan for a residential landscape, we're really talking about practices that can enhance the overall biological diversity of your landscape and really viewing that yard less as an extension of the living room, less as an extension of the interior of the house, and more as a living ecosystem. And we'll be talking about mainly species diversity, but genetic diversity plays into it too, especially when it comes down to selecting your plants and really being mindful of incorporating sexual reproduction of your plants into your planting plan and making sure that there are opportunities for genetic diversity as well. So what are we talking about when we're talking about habitat? Well, these are the basic elements we're probably all familiar with: food, water, shelter, space. Trying to provision as many natural features as possible rather than just manufactured structures. Um, but also lots of other things in the bigger picture: migration patterns, overall biodiversity, life cycles of the species that we're trying to support, the climate and climate trends, changing climate, topography, soil. And then, you'll have species that are somewhere on this continuum of specialist to generalist. So if you're trying to do, you know, restoration for a highly specialist species, maybe if you're talking about a bee, there are bee specialist plants. That's a great place to start if you've got a small area. If we're talking about a wood thrush that requires, a large forest patches, that might be a little more difficult, but you could be providing stopover habitat for wood thrushes on migration. So thinking about where they are in their annual cycle, their life cycle and migration, and trying to factor the, species biology and all of those different phases. Also, seasonality plays into. We are a temperate. We're a temperate area. People think about fireflies, and they tend to only think about fireflies when the adults are out there. They've emerged and they're out there flying around. But what about being good stewards of firefly habitat throughout the winter? Where do they go in the winter? Their larvae. They're in the soil, in the leaf litter, in the logs. So really thinking about that species full annual cycle and how we can accommodate that. It's also really important to just be cognizant of mid-Atlantic climate trends. We're facing increasing average temperatures, increasingly heavy precipitation events, more intense storms, drought, sea level rise. So all of these factors are going to influence how successful our restoration plan is and how much resilience are we contributing to our community through our actions. And it might be confusing that both drought and heavy precipitation are included in those predictions. It might seem contradictory and really, really confusing. And that starts to like plant a little doubt in people's minds. But it's really all about the water cycle and the increased heat energy in our atmosphere, accelerating evaporation. That water goes into a warmer atmosphere, which holds more water. So you have higher water storage in a warmer atmosphere. And then that precipitation comes down as heavy rains. And our modern day stormwater systems just don't have the capacity to manage some of the, extreme precipitation events we've been facing. So I feel like there's a lot of potential in our residential landscapes to absorb more stormwater and at the same time create excellent habitat and increase overall biodiversity. So the data from 2020, 2025 bears this out. We are breaking heat records every year. The June 2025 heat wave brought temperatures higher than average across Maryland, and higher than average temperatures continued into July across Maryland. Higher than average precipitation as well was documented across Maryland in July. But we came into the summer, so heavy precipitation events are definitely on the rise, and 100-year flood events are predicted to occur like every 20 to 50 years by the end of the century. And that flash flooding really hits close to home. These are scenes just from my home county, Montgomery County, just this July. And these type of scenes are playing out all across the state. So I just have to touch on this because it's so important to what I'm talking about and how you can have multiple goals and multiple benefits from your project. I like to think about what we're doing in terms of ecosystem services. And the two types of ecosystem services I'm really focusing on in my projects that I'll talk about today are those regulating ecosystem services, water infiltration, climate control, carbon storage, and the supporting ecosystem services, that's sustaining biodiversity and habitat. And you can meet multiple goals when you're actually really intentionally planning for that. And just to show you this pattern of drought, flood, this is 2024 precipitation data. All those red dots, those are extended dry spells. The green dots are heavy precipitation events. So we're in another cycle of drought. So we've seen drought, like flood, drought this year as well. So what are we talking about? What types of habitat features are we talking about? It is plants, but it's a lot more than just plants. We're talking about soil condition, leaf litter, rocks, stems and twigs, stumps, logs, snags, seeds and berries, nest sites, vegetative cover, water. All of these come together as habitat. So what about soil? What is soil exactly? If we could use the chat box, just what's the first word that comes to your mind? If I ask you the question, what is soil composed of? And soil is different depending on what lens you're looking at it from, like who you are and your priorities. If you talk to a botanist, soil is a medium for plant growth. If you talk to an engineer, It's a medium for building on. They're really interested in that mineral soil below the topsoil because that's the really sturdy engineering medium. Not as great for plant growth though. So, what do we have in the chat box? What do people think soil is made of?
We are getting organic matter. Beth mentioned that. That's our
Yep.
main one we've heard so far. That's
Organic matter.
yeah.
Okay, that's good. That's a great start. But soil is composed of minerals, um, a small amount of organic matter. Really healthy loam soil is about 5% organic matter. But up to half of healthy soil is water and air. And we don't often think about the importance of water and air is actually part of the soil structure and really, really essential for plant growth. So when I'm thinking about habitat restoration, and maybe I'm doing restoration for song sparrows because I want to make sure I always have song sparrows nearby. Um, I actually really have to start by thinking about soil biodiversity really as the foundation of our food web. And it's important for so many different reasons, but it's really essential to soil health, soil fertility, land productivity, and really, really important for carbon storage. So more carbon is stored in soils than the total carbon in the atmosphere and above ground vegetation. So it's a carbon store, it's a plant growth medium, and it's also a host of, you know, a massive amount of biodiversity. So we've got our living, our non-living organic matter, the living stuff, the dead stuff, and then we've got minerals, primarily sand, silt, and clay. And this is that pie chart showing our soil being half air, half water. And this is like a healthy loam soil. Um, Now, suburban and urban soils tend to be highly compromised. So you won't see that air and water. They tend to be compacted. They'll even be intentionally compacted for building. You'll see a lot of erosion, disturbed soil layers, contamination, reduced soil moisture, and organic matter can be compromised. So these are all challenges when you're talking about designing. It's not just about like what plants would look nice in my yard. It's like what is the substrate you're starting with? How's it been compromised? And what are some of the things you can do to begin to restore that substrate? And just keep in mind, if your land was historically forest, it already started with a probably started with a pretty thin topsoil layer to begin with. So grassland vegetation tends to have really thick topsoil below it. Forest, not so much. And there's a lot of biogeochemistry that goes into that. But you probably started out with a thin topsoil layer, and then a lot of that is scraped off and disturbed in the development process. So there are a few ways to analyze your soil. There are tools that are available to you, whether you're an amateur or professional. And I would recommend using all of these tools. There's the USDA NRCS Web Soil Survey. This is just broad brushstrokes. This is not going to get down to the nitty gritty detail of your planting bed, but it's a good start to understand what what the primary composition of your soil would be. And then taking lab tests, especially like you could take multiple soil samples from different planting beds, different parts of your yard. And we have a great soil analysis website on the extension website. Luke's going to drop that link in there. And we'll give you all kinds of information about what you'll learn from your soil test and where you can get soil tests done. So we've got the online evaluation, the desktop evaluation, the lab tests, and then getting familiar with the soil texture, the sand, the silt, the clay. Again, this is going to all factor into which plants will thrive in specific locations. And this is going to be really different, all around your yard. So I won't get into the step-by-step of the jar test, but you got to try this. It's really, really fun. And you can just Google soil texture jar test. There are great extension resources on how to do this. But it's a great way to analyze the different layers of your soil and what the percent composition is. And then you can use that data to determine specifically what kind of soil you're dealing with, soil texture. So I've got sandy clay loam. We'll just keep that in the back of our mind. It's a really tough medium when you really all of the organic matter has really literally been engineered out of your soil. Um, but that soil organic matter is not just important for growing plants. 1% soil organic matter in the top 6 inches of soil will hold 27,000 gallons of water in 1 acre. Now imagine if that's 5% soil organic matter that you saw in that pie chart. That could retain a lot of precipitation, a lot of stormwater that does not need to be, flooding into our stormwater systems, and causing problems downstream in terms of water pollution and flooding. So simple at-home practices like grass cycling, using a mulching mower, leaf mulching if you do it right away. And I've got my worm bin here, creating organic matter, using arborist wood chips as a mulching medium. All of these are ways to begin to introduce soil organic matter back into your landscape. So how is that habitat? Okay, so the soil itself is a habitat medium. So the practice is using organic material to grow your native plants to improve the soil condition, but the benefits are many. It's reducing soil compaction. It's a better growing substrate. With increasing biodiversity, you're going to get increased aeration, soil permeability from those burrowing insects, worms, wildlife, burrowing wildlife. And so you can see the relationship here between fireflies, firefly larvae. They're also great predators of slugs and snails, garden pests. But then they are part of the nocturnal insect food base of whippoorwills. So just by enhancing that soil, increasing leaf litter, increasing that organic matter, you can be setting the stage for a healthier nocturnal insect prey base. Soil is also a habitat medium for ground nesting bees like mining bees. And I'll show you my mining bee colony that established right after I got my project going. So they like some bare ground. They don't really like perfect lawns. So you can actually create some great mining bee habitat and increase your soil aeration in the process by not tilling, leaving some bare patches, and where they do occur, you want to make sure that you're being a good steward of our ground nesting bees. Leaf litter is another key habitat feature. Again, less work, less raking, less leaf blowing, less energy used. Leaf litter itself is important habitat substrate for many, many species, including salamanders and other amphibians, bats, fireflies, foraging substrate for a lot of birds that are ground foragers, and many, many insects that use it for hibernation, laying eggs, and developing in those larval stages. So leaf litter itself is a habitat component. So there are a few options for leaving the leaves. People have lots of questions like, do I just need to leave the leaves laying all over my lawn? Some people aren't comfortable with that, or they're just getting used to the idea. It is important to consider the leaf size and species, the decomposition rates. Oaks are slower to break down than some other species, but you have some options. You can rake whole leaves into planting beds. You can mulch in place if you do it quickly, like right after they fall. Leaf cycling, incorporate that soil organic matter back into the soil. You can create a wild corner that you intentionally are leaving a little bit more of a natural forest floor with leaf litter, and that's your wild corner. You can add them to the compost pile, rake under trees, or just leave them where they fall in no-mow zones under your trees. So lots of different ways to work with leaf litter. And this is an example from the same planting project that I'll show you in a few minutes. Rocks and rock walls. Rock features are habitat for bees and other insects, small mammals, reptiles and amphibians, even birds could use this moss, could use rock walls as foraging substrate. Lots of different ways to use rock as both a design element and a habitat feature. And just as a reminder, I'm sure that we're preaching to the choir, but many, many benefits of working with native plants. I know we have our favorite ornamentals, but they're eco-regionally adapted to the environmental conditions where you're trying to grow. After you get them established, they're relatively low maintenance. They're going to provide a lot more support to native pollinators and beneficial insects, have high wildlife value, provide all of these different ecosystem services like we talked about, and they're just beautiful, especially if you're planning for continuous bloom and you're starting to think about that seasonal color, and having blooming spring through fall. and berries throughout, spring, summer, and fall. So I'm going to talk about a little bit of a mapping, planning, design process that I've used, and just give you. This is actually how I planned the project that I'll show you. Started with a base photo, just printed off of Google Earth. This is actually my home landscape. You're going to want to draw out your hardscape, utility lines. You've got to call 811 to get those marked out. Water flows, sunshades, soils, vegetation. We're going to build this plan up layer by layer, starting with the impervious surfaces and getting those all outlined and traced out. And then I've marked those utility lines in red with red dashes. Then you're going to want to get a handle on your water flow. This is going to require getting on your rain jacket and going out and, really checking out how that water flows during heavy precipitation events. Start to map that out. And that's going to give you a good idea of not only where your problem areas are that might be a little floody, but also you're getting a free source of rainwater, and how are you going to use that to your best advantage. And then map out your sun and shade. This is a very simplified version of that, but I'll show you some other techniques you can use. And then we're going to layer those all together. So now I'm kind of got the big picture of what I'm working with, what sort of elements I'm working with, my topography, my water flow, my light. Then you can start to draw out where you might have potential planting beds and what you want to do with them. So the one that I'll show you is in the top right corner. I was going to do a sedge bed, and then I went crazy with all of the specialist bee plants. So I've got sedges, I've got native flowers, and then I've got a shrub buffer that I'm building up, actually growing some water-loving shrubs on the other end after it flows through the culvert. So the culvert is under our driveway, and heavy stormwater flows through there anytime there's a heavy precipitation event. So I felt like that was going to be, because I care about managing stormwater and creating habitat, that was going to be the ideal place to start. Plus we have a lot of people walking their dogs right along there, and I can be educating at the same time. So you're going to choose a few focal areas to start with, align your project with your main objectives, and then you're going to want to map out your existing vegetation. Where do you have invasive plants you need to get on top of? Ornamental plants you might want to eventually transition away from, and where are you going to work with your native plants? And then map out your soil type and texture. So I did this simple map just to show, purple being invasives, pink being ornamentals, green being our natives, and then mapping out my soil type. Now I could get into a little more detail, but this is just an example of how you can get your soil map in there too. So my primary objectives were to capture and absorb stormwater, to conserve water, reduce downstream flooding, and then water my habitat plantings for my birds and wild bees, especially song sparrows. I'm really partial to song sparrows. So it's also, we talked about the big picture climate, like macro climate trends, but it's really important to think about microclimate, those climate conditions, right? Localized climate conditions where you're planning to plant right near the earth. So I did this quadrant, and just put on the vertical vector is my light. My light features sun to shade, and then the horizontal vector is wet to dry. And then I can start putting my different phased planting beds in these different quadrants. This is going to help me with my plant selection and what I can actually do with that space. And then you can do a nested quadrant where you're also embedding your soil properties, your soil texture, and your pH, which you'll get back from that lab test. And so then you've got a really good picture when you go plant shopping. You could take this with you to the native plant sale, when you're doing your online plant shopping, and make sure that you're selecting plants that are going to be appropriate for that location. So the project I'll show you, was sunny and wet. So I needed plants that were going to thrive in sunny, wet conditions, and they could also tolerate clay soils. There's some more detailed resources online. Go to treehugger.com. He's got a great method for mapping out your light. If you're handy with Adobe, he did layers of photos to get a composite image of light over his yard. Super cool. You can also draw shade, just sketch the shade out. These are sketches that were made like 1 hour at a time across a whole day. You want to think about where do you want your pathways? Think about the movement of people, think about the movement of light. How does the eye travel through the space? So you do want to delineate legible pathways. So what I'm showing you now is kind of like my inspiration board, like different beautiful examples of pathways. This is what I created on the bottom right using that big mountain of wood chips I showed you. I'm still working through those wood chips, but I've got a nice wood chip path that's already absorbing water that was, causing some erosion across the yard. And I have patent leather beetles moving into the wood chips. I wasn't planning for patent leather beetles, but they're amazing, and just more biodiversity. If you've got visual focal points like wall, a bench, a water feature, it's nice to design around those. It is a residential landscape after all. Sculpture, fences, or other design details you might want to show off and enhance with native plants. And then thinking about which high use lawn areas do you want to keep and for what purpose. So you can see here's a wild corner example from our website on the left side. Beautiful, leaving the leaf litter. They've got flagstone pathway, limited lawn area. And then here's an example from our Baywise, one of our Baywise yards in Prince George's County, where they've delineated a pathway and they've left the turf grass as their pathway, and everything else is designed as planting beds that will capture stormwater as it runs across the slope. So they've really incorporated topography and then, delineating those pathways and reducing the lawn in the process. Select some low maintenance grasses, so incorporating some native grasses or some low maintenance grasses into your plan is another good strategy. Now we're going to talk about replacing sections of turf grass with some native plant alternatives, and I'll show you some examples of this. If you have favorite turf grass alternatives, please feel free to share in the chat box. The project on the left, this is in Cumberland. It's a church, the Emmanuel Episcopal Church. They converted their entire turf grass lawn to a native pollinator garden, and here it is in bloom. And then the two on the right are my project that I'll show you. This is the drainage swale project, which I'm converting from turf grass to all native plants. Consider native ground covers, green mulch options, living mulch as an alternative to lots and lots of bark or dyed bark. And here's some examples of that from Silburn Arboretum, native ground cover alternatives in various stages. And then consider planting densely and like really, really filling it out. We want to think about those shrubs and those trees kind of locked in an embrace. Because when we're talking about nest cover, when we're talking about, actual shelter, we're not talking about individual plant specimens, but actually creating structural complexity. And then finally, defining your borders can give it a sense of having a more legible design. I've got two photos on the bottom left that I just got over the last week using rock, stone to delineate garden boundaries. But green borders using natural materials are all nice alternatives. So just a little bit about the lawn conversion process.
And Stacy,
Um,
I think
yeah.
we might need to hold this for the Q&A so we
Oh,
can
okay.
get Lisa to go.
Okay.
So, but these are some
Great.
great slides that are going to be coming up. I had a chance to talk with Stacy before to see her like hands-on experience of how she did this on her property. But I just want to be cognizant of time
Okay.
and make sure we have a
Yeah.
chance to
Yeah.
get Lisa in here.
Thank you.
So yeah, thank you. This is awesome. Thank you for sharing all this, and keep your slides handy because I hope we have a little bit of time to run through this. This is a really cool case study. Um, Lisa, do you want to take a chance? Take your share.
So as Stacy started mentioning, there are many options for lawn replacements. But first of all, it's interesting to like put things in perspective and give it context. And Maryland actually has a lot of lawn dedicated to, or I'm sorry, acreage dedicated to lawn, over 1.3 million acres. And that's a lot. And a lot of that is very useful. It's for paths, for dogs, for kids to run on. But really, when we look around and, when you're driving through your neighborhood, a lot of it is really not used. It's sort of a green carpet. It looks pretty, but it's not used. So how could we reimagine lawns? What could they become? And Stacy gave us a lot of good examples and inspiration for what we could do with lawns. So for the rest of it looks like we have maybe 15 minutes. We'll kind of think about some different ways that we could, different techniques for converting lawn to early successional habitats slash meadows. And of course, we could plant shrubs and trees. Those are also awesome options, but we'll focus on early successional habitat for the rest of the presentation. I'm sorry, I'm losing my voice here today. So we'll do this from the perspective initially from a roadside vegetation management study. And I think this is useful because you can use this model for different scales through the landscape. So whether you're a homeowner, whether you have farmland that you're managing, these same principles can be used. So a few years back, and I worked with MDOT as a grad student. They had different motivations for a couple of reasons why they wanted to reduce the amount of lawn or turf they had on the side of the road. They wanted to maintain that safety zone, but beyond that, they thought, we need to save money from a management perspective. So that was one motivation to reduce the turf that they manage. But secondly, in 2016, a national initiative came out saying all hands on deck. Agencies should help do what they can to foster habitat that will support pollinators, mitigate pollinator declines. So we conducted a study looking at 3 different vegetation management options. There was an annual fall mow, there was a no mow with spot treatment of woodies and invasives, and then we had a control group was their standard practice at the time of mowing several times throughout the year. So this you could think about would be maybe akin to some yards, some larger yards, or it could even be a smaller yard. And I'll go through this super quickly. This was a 3-year study. So I'll just kind of I'll give a big overview, if you will. Some of the things that we monitored were plants. We had different methods for doing that so that we could, get a granular approach of, or idea of what was on these roadsides once we stopped mowing. And then we also stood back and took a big view to see like what was happening on a larger scale. And because we were interested in pollinators, and one of the goals was to increase pollinator forage, we also did bee monitoring, and we used different methods for that as well: pan traps, netting, observations. Again, very briefly, this was like a 40-page report, so I'm summarizing this to the nth degree. But what did we find when MDOT stopped mowing as frequently? We found some of these flowers here. These are all flowers from roadsides throughout Maryland that once the mowing frequency was reduced, they were able to return. So we had a host of different types of milkweeds, including green milkweed. We even had an orchid on the side of the road called Lady's Tresses. Great blue lobelia. We had this really cool blue waxweed. All sorts of beautiful plants started returning just naturally in these areas that were now being mowed less frequently. And some of the other things that we found we had a total of 136 floral species. We were really focused on pollen and nectar, so that's why we focused on flowering species. But just about half of those species were native, and 36 of those were of high pollinator conservation value. And we also saw in these management treatments, we saw the number of bees, the abundance and diversity of bees greatly increased, as well as the floral diversity and abundance. So it was very exciting. 83 different species of bees were documented on these flowers, and there are even 7 new county records. And it's not just that those management techniques of reduced mowing and the spot treatment method is also used in utility rights of way. This picture is from, I believe it's Queen Anne's County. I'm not sure exactly where the lines were there, but it was taken this summer, and you can see that they're also incorporating, these different management tools instead of mowing repeatedly throughout the season. And as you can see in this picture, we have succession taking place here. We have a host of beautiful trees coming up. And of course, those will need to be cut down within a couple years or sprayed because they need to keep those lines clear. But by reducing the amount of mowing in these utility rights of way, whether it's transportation or energy, is it's allowing a whole host of native plants to return, and it's supporting a lot of wildlife. Um, these are just some of the pictures that were, or I'm sorry, some of the plants that were found in that right of way that I just showed you. And you have to get down and look really closely, but some of them are fascinating. Like the one in the middle is one of Maryland's few carnivorous plants called sundew. And so there are all these really cool things growing when we reduce that mowing. But I will say that that mowing is also important because it maintains these areas as early successional habitats, so these species can continue to thrive. And USGS, Sam Jogi, who runs the Bee Lab, he has said that utility rights of way are some of our best pollinator habitat. We have some of our rare species are only found in these rights of way, these early successional habitats. Ah, sorry. So what about for home landscapes? Whether you have 5 acres that you're stewarding, or maybe you have half an acre, these principles you can also try in your space that you're managing. And I think an important thing is to set expectations. If you stop mowing for a summer, is it going to look like the beautiful picture here? Probably not. But over time, it could. Some of the pros to this natural regeneration method are: one, it's inexpensive, you save money mowing, and you get free plants. Plants can be expensive. So if they can regenerate naturally, that's wonderful. Also, as you go out and explore, and I've heard this from many people, when they reduce the amount of mowing and they let plants return, is the sense of discovery. It's every day you go out there, something new seems to be there, and it's a very not only educational, but it's helps connect people back to the land. And then Stacy talked about the importance of maintaining soil health by just letting natural regeneration take place. You don't have to till, you can maintain healthy soil structure. Some of the cons, I would say, to natural regeneration is that it does require a lot of patience. This is not going to happen overnight. And it really depends on the history, the management history of the given location. If you have an old field, there might be a lot of wonderful natives that return relatively quickly. If you, on the other hand, are in a development where mowing has taken place for 30 years, there might not really be much of a seed bank left there. But you can also look at the surrounding vegetation. Some seed can come in, so you can have volunteers. Other cons are plant ID, you kind of needing to get out there and learn plants, but that could also be a plus. And then perception. And I would say this is the biggest one for homeowners, that if you have a spot, like say in the backyard, where maybe the neighbors, it's not as visible, then this might be more acceptable. Whereas if it's in your front yard, depending on your neighborhood, that might not be welcomed. So natural regeneration is one way that we can do a lawn conversion, lawn to early successional habitat. Another way is active planting using seed. If you are going to go this method, I would suggest using a seed distributor. We have, I think that Luke, you're going to drop some suggestions in the chat box. But you find a seed distributor that specializes in restoration. Because if you go to say a box store or order something online, it might look really pretty the first year, but they're usually comprised mainly of non-native annuals. So if you want something that's really going to support wildlife, again, check with some seed distributors that Luke will drop in the chat. And I did want to highlight this very quickly, this Y farm. This is, Luke, you had mentioned working farms, and how, working farms can most certainly support wildlife. This is an excellent example in Y Farm on the Eastern Shore, Queen Anne's County. And they have 450 acres of crops, and they set aside 33 acres for wildflower meadows. And this was a seeding project that they did, and it's viewed as one of the best restoration projects in the region. It's really phenomenal, and they have northern bobwhite have returned. They have a whole slew of birds that have returned to this area. They also included, you can see in the background, a row of native hedges. And so this is, again, a working farm. The working farm is what supports the wildflowers, he said. And so anyway, it's definitely doable, and it can even increase some of your crops. Some guides for you. This, I know we're short on time, Luke, so I'll be mindful. And I think, Luke, you're going to drop these in the chat as well. If you are considering converting some of your lawn to early successional habitat / meadow, Xerces Society has wonderful materials for you. The Mid-Atlantic Native Meadows Guide, it really walks you through the whole process. It even breaks down the economics of going from turf to a meadow. And it importantly talks about the prep and maintenance. One of the biggest things, if you are going to endeavor to convert some of your lawn to meadow, is prep. Site prep is really key. And this is one of the things that I would say why many meadows fail, is because we get really excited and we just want to jump into the fun part, which is the seeding or planting. But if you're interested in prepping your site and seeding, Xerces Society has a great organic site prep. They compare the different methods. They again break down the costs of each, the pros and cons, and it really depends on the scale of your project. I think time-wise, maybe we could save this for the question period. But anyway, there are some things to, like some tips if you are seeding, and we can address that later. I just wanted to briefly, if you are a homeowner and you're thinking, I would love to do something like this in my front yard, but I have an HOA or I have neighbors that might not like the meadow look. There's a great article in the New York Times. You can find this elsewhere besides the New York Times. It's Sarah Weiner, who she and her partner, they live in a very traditionally landscaped neighborhood, and they wanted a meadow. And so they went about doing it in a very elegant way. And they were very mindful of their neighbors and their HOA. And so I encourage you to see what you can find online. There's a lot of information about her story, and she could definitely do the best job telling her story. But she's also, she speaks regularly. So again, I encourage you to listen in if you're interested. And then I wanted to just point out, there is another way to create meadows. It was a new product that's out. It's called native wildflower sod. And this is something when I was in the bee lab as a student that I got to help work on. And basically it is like a traditional sod product, except for it has native wildflowers and grasses. So this is just coming online. So, I think their inventory is probably somewhat limited because again, they're just getting started. But if you're looking for a very easy solution to replacing lawn with native habitat that's early successional, this might be a good option for you. This is, I believe, my last slide, Luke. So just a couple tips to help you get started is, I would suggest learn about what's allowed in your community. And just to mention to folks, because a lot of people are concerned about, oh, am I going to get fined or get in trouble for not mowing my lawn? A 2021 Maryland law, it's called the Low Impact Landscaping Law, passed. And basically, in a nutshell, it says HOAs cannot require turf grass. They have to allow more sustainable alternatives. So, it's good to be armed with that information, but still, I would suggest checking with your given community. And if you like to be part of a community, you don't want to go this alone, check out lesslawnmorelife.org. They have wonderful challenges. They help you keep focused on the task at hand. And also keep in mind, financial help is often available. Check with county governments, with NGOs. Maryland, actually, there are quite a few counties that offer stormwater conservation landscaping rebates. So if you're interested, look into that. And then keep in mind, small can be beautiful. The examples that I did show, I realized were kind of larger scale, but you can do this on a very small scale. You can do this in a 4x4 plot, 3x3. You can do 2x2. You can just, start small, and that's actually recommended, I would say, if you're totally new to this. And get creative. You can do organic fun shapes that are beautiful. Okay, here are some resources, and I know we're out of time, Luke.
You're good. You're good. That's great. Do you want to highlight any of these in particular?
Certainly, yes. If you are thinking about seeding, and I have to say, seeding is probably like the gold standard, right? Because then you know what's going in that mix. Um, and the tricky part is, well, a couple of tricky things, the site prep. But then the second thing is when your seeds start to germinate, is figuring out what is this? They're really tiny. They're really hard to ID. Even I would say experts have a hard time IDing those little seedlings. Earned Seed has a wonderful gallery of what each seedling looks like in the meadow mixes that they offer. So you can see that online. And he's Mark Feely's working. He's updating it, so it's going to be even better soon. So just you can check back. That should be up hopefully soon. And these are just two wonderful books that I highly recommend that highlight a lot of the ecological principles that Stacy highlighted.
Great. Great. Well, there is an active discussion going on in the chat, and we're gonna see how we can handle this. Wow, a lot of questions I'm seeing about in particular about how to manage certain species or what are some of the things, poison ivy issues. We've seen stilt grass come through. Um, what are your different approaches, whether you do seeding with plugs and things like that? Maybe I could ask both you guys, at a both you gals. Uh, if let's say you're a homeowner that doesn't have a whole lot of time and you just want to get started, what would you say is just a kind of quick and first thing to do? You have a large lawn in your front yard. What would you think about like doing just to get started?
I'll start with that one, I guess. I would pick you. You used the phrase, Luke, at the beginning of low hanging fruit. I think that's a great way to go. So, like, if you have in your yard, you have, I don't know, maybe like two or three shrubs that aren't connected. They're just sort of standalone soldiers, if you will, and they've got grass underneath them. Maybe you can connect those. That's a great way to start. It's pretty straightforward. So yeah, I would go for those low hanging fruit projects first.
Stacy, did you have anything you'd think as far as first steps? I know you had some great examples of how you went about doing it. Maybe you could just share some of
Yeah,
your
I'd
thoughts.
rather just. What I'm showing you right now is just from a very small area. I started with paper landscape fabric because it needed to be malleable. I didn't want anything plastic. And then I sort of jazzed it up with a couple layers of coir fabric. This is a really small area, but I felt like it was high impact because it's right where all of my neighbors' stormwater flows across our property. And it was an opportunity to sort of teach about native plants in the process. So, um, again, I don't have a lot of time. I work evenings, weekends. I'm a working mom, so this was going to be my focal area. I can't do the whole landscape at once, but so much life has come into this area, and this is just from last fall to this spring. So this was 100% turf grass, um, last August, and just by being really strategic on where I chose to focus, I've got song sparrows, I've got nesting catbirds, I have all kinds of insects I had not known before. So I'm meeting a new insect every day. I've got monarchs that have come in, I've got caterpillars.
Stacy, I'm
Um,
curious. Did you face any Bermuda grass? And that's coming through in the chat, and a few people are saying, "Yeah, I've got that problem too." If you have very competitive grass species, like how would you maybe knock them back or get these other things established?
so my challenge, there was very little Bermuda grass that I could just hand pull. Was more stilt grass, and so the stilt grass has been a big problem for a lot of people across the state this year. I think it's growing. So just really getting on top of it. It's easy to pull. Getting on top of it before it goes to seed, and pulling it manually. And again, I can't hand pull the entire landscape, but I'm really focusing in on this area to give the native plants a competitive advantage. Then I'm hoping through the biological process, reseeding, sending out runners, rhizomes, this project is going to spread and then I'm going to let it, so I'm just really, really focusing on the seed source, getting the plant material in there in a really concentrated way. Mining bees have moved in, working with that stormwater with my rain barrel. And I won't talk about the sedge project, but yeah, really working with that stormwater and then getting those small areas started as focal points is would be my strategy.
Gonna say,
And I think that's a really good point that Stacy made, that you made, Stacy, about starting small, because it's really easy. It was like when, especially when you look at beautiful pictures, to be inspired and think, I want to go big. But often it's too much. It really ends up being a lot. So, but starting small, that's doable. Um, and then you boost your confidence because it works, and the
Yeah.
neighbors are happy, and then you can just keep building from there.
yeah. And I would say, I think Bermuda grass, I mean, a lot of these invasives that you deal with are probably dependent on how much sun you're getting into the area. Like Bermuda grass in a full sun environment, that stilt grass I find is very competitive in moderate shade environments or even shady places, but not as competitive in full sun. So you're probably dealing with different things depending where you are in your yard. And I put in the chat earlier, it is an ongoing effort for stilt grass. I sort of look at it as complementing it is probably going to be there at least for me for a while, unless gra- some new microstegium, which is the scientific name, some stilt grass specific herbicide comes out, or some magic technology that will target that species alone. I'm sort of living with it, but allowing an overstory of shrubs and native things come in as well.
Yeah, and that's where like assertive natives, a lot of times people refer to them as thugs or bullies, and they like, oh, don't plant that, it'll take over. But we can really tap into that expansive biology of those plants and let them take over. Let them take over the stilt grass. And so there are a couple species that have anecdotally worked really well against stilt grass, like orange jewelweed, thimblewill, oh shoot, I'm going to blank out, eastern wood sedge, and a couple others. So yeah, tap into those assertive natives to help.
Yeah. Some folks are
Yeah,
asking
this
about, Deborah
this
was asking about native seed heads. Can you just collect native seed heads and sprinkle them around your yard? I do that all the time. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Totally works. Sometimes it might take a year or even 2 years before they'll germinate and you see the plant. I know milkweed's kind of a slow starter. Sometimes they'll sit in the seed for a year before you start seeing the plant. So be patient.
Hmm.
And maybe that's another thing I'd be love to hear y'all's thoughts on is we did a native meadow grassland planting, and on year one, I went out and was looking at our plots and it was full of grass, and I thought, wow, we just threw away a bunch of money on native seed. But sure enough, when we went in there and measured, they're in there. They're just small. And year two, they started to really take over. And year three, they really can also take a larger proportion of the ground. So I would say, from my experience, it's a patience component, to give it
Yeah.
at least a year and wait for year two.
Yeah, that's a good point. And yeah, you will have that those shorter lived species like the annuals, like especially if you do use partridge pea and you use black-eyed Susan, Rebecca's are really good at coming up quickly. And a lot of times you will have the grasses usually are the ones that take a long time, I think, like the warm season grasses, but um, those those early bloomers, those annuals and biennials, you'll get that big flush of color sometimes by year, sometimes even by year one, but especially by year two, then they'll fade, and then you'll have some of your longer lived perennials come in. So yeah, it definitely evolves over time, like you said, and it requires patience. But I think that's part of the fun of meadows, is that they're not stagnant at all. They're very alive and constantly evolving.
Yeah, I will add to the aggressive early starters, as in addition to Black-eyed Susan, which does great. Also, Lanceleaf coreopsis does a good job. It's a nice one.
Mm-hmm.
They would get some color, some yellow flowers in that first year as well.
Yeah.
Um, Partridge pea is coming up for sure. We put that in a lot of our mixes. It's pretty strong starter.
Hmm. And they do suggest, and I think it was on the Xerces slide, that if you are going to plant seed in the mid-Atlantic, that you do it October through January. So that's now, which is great if you've prepped your site already. And that way you have that natural cold stratification that first season, and so you kind of give everything a head start on the germination versus doing it in the spring.
Yeah. Now, a question came up earlier in the chat, and Lisa, we had a couple different answers for. I think it was Mark. What percentage of grasses versus wildflowers do you do? And I fully agree. The native grasses will take a while before they come in. And I'll say for in terms of what happens with bobwhite or even turkey nesting cover, uh, they tend to prefer a forb dominated environment with scattered bunch grasses. And I found that in Maryland and many places in Maryland, we will get a lot of natural regeneration from broom sedge, which is a native
Mhm.
grass and it kind of comes up on its own in a lot of places. Um, but you also had some different recommendations. Love to hear your thoughts on like the percentages and how do you make that mix and what are the objectives that would maybe figure for one versus the other.
Right. So, and the answer I gave was I think it really depends on your project goals. But one of the I would say the what I see recommended most is 70% grasses, 30% forbs. Just because those grasses, they really do help add structure. And they help the meadow to be stable. So, having some cool and warm season grasses in there. But I think you're right. Like if your main priority is bobwhite, and they do better with a higher forb percentage, then you're definitely going to want to do like a little bit of research and see what your target species is going to require.
Yeah, I think a grass component would also probably more soil stabilization, maybe a little bit more like those
Hmm.
heavy rainstorms. They're going to soak up more of that water. There'll be more interception on the leaves versus a forb dominated one. Maybe you have if it's a slope or something like that, you might have a little bit less soil holding capacity, especially I think in winter whenever all the forbs sort of die back and they're a bunch of twindly little twigs compared to a big bunch grass that has a lot of biomass on it. One thing I always like to emphasize and think about is timing of mowing. And I know I have some thoughts on it. I'd be curious to hear y'all's thoughts on like managing with mowing and when do you think about mowing and how do you integrate that in to your native? So you had a native meadow that was an area. How does mowing fit in?
I would personally, again, I think it depends on your project goals. And like for instance, for MDOT with their project, like they had a set time. They're like, this is when our people can do it. And so they had to do it like at a non-optimal time, but it was practical and logistical. But if you have wiggle room, personally, I think early spring is best because you leave those grasses there for winter habitat. But like in the Sarah Wiener landscape project, because hers was in the front yard and it was so noticeable. She to help keep peace in the neighborhood, she decided to mow back earlier, at least those first couple of years. So I think it's depends again on your situation and your goals. What do you think? Like for
Stacy,
Bob
did you want
White?
to add anything? And
Yeah, I
I'll give
had,
you my
I
thoughts
had,
on certain wildlife species that are my focal. Like,
yeah.
yeah,
If I could just add something from the residential lawn perspective, also it depends on the whether if you've got warm season or cool season grasses, it's really advised to only mow during the active period, not to mow during the dormant period, just for the grass health. So it is good to be cognizant of that, of not mowing your grasses during the dormant period.
I think on my angle, one thing I think about in terms of if again more natural environments and ground nesting birds. Again, this is probably more like rural areas, but there's certainly birds maybe nesting even in suburban lots for sure in some of these meadows. So there's a nesting season that starts as early as I believe April 15th is when we start preventing any sort of major disturbances to prevent killing nests. So we angle from like grasshopper sparrows and things like that. So that's April 15th and then all the way till July 1st is kind of this like as the earliest kind of stage in which you might want to think about it. There still could be re-nesting happening in those areas all the way out until mid-July, even into August. But some great work from Virginia Working Landscapes. They've got a great guide on timing of mowing,
Mm.
and they say they've found if you can wait till July 1st before you mow, two-thirds of the birds will have fledged and will be able to get out. If you can wait till
Mm.
July 15th, you're going to have 90% or maybe even a little bit more than 90% will be fledged. So you're going to reduce those impacts to the nesting bird season, but during that sort of kind of key period for nesting. So that's one important thing I always think about. And another thing is, and again, if your neighbors will let you do this, I like to leave all that biomass on the ground, standing vegetation over winter for thermal cover for the rabbits and other types of things to hide out in, and a lot of those invertebrates who are nesting, the ground nesting bees and things like that. So they have cover. Some species will apparently nest inside the stems of grasses over winter, and so or will I guess have their larvae in those stems. So I oftentimes will say we've kind of recommended just waiting until right before green up, that April 15th day, anywhere from like March 15th to April 15th to if you need to set it back at that time, and then allow it to. You'll have a very short period of no cover on the ground, because once it's mowed, if you mow right at the end of the summer, then you'll end up with a sort of a barren landscape for throughout the winter, and there's just no thermal cover for a lot of things. So that's a
Mm.
little thing that we recommend.
And those
Yeah, there's certainly a
fledglings
lot
need
of
that.
factors. Yeah, it's a lot to balance. Beth has a comment there. I see, Beth, you said you want to emphasize that any meadow seeding should focus on local ecotype species. Yes, Beth, I think that's a really good point. And sometimes local ecotype species are challenging to find in the Northeast, but there are a couple. We can get seed from usually at least within a couple hundred miles um, of here. But yes, using appropriate seed is definitely important.
Yeah, and that's a nice advantage. And I think we had talked a little bit about just letting the native seed bank come back versus planting. At least I think you covered that a bit. And the nice thing about the
Mhm.
native seed bank is it's from the local area. So, and you'd be amazed at what comes back on its own in some of these areas. Um, I see a lot of fleabanes. I saw blue vervain showed up, persimmons, like a lot of great stuff could be growing up on its own that will
Mhm.
surprise you. And you don't have to to buy the seed, which is nice. And then you also
Yeah.
know it's straight up local from your local region. Cool. Um, well, lots of questions. We're at 113. Really have enjoyed this. For all the audience members, I'm going to download this chat and I will share it in a document, and I will ask our presenters for their slides, and I will
Hmm.
follow up with everybody. If you are not on my email list, I'm going to pop a link where to do that. You can go to wildlife.umd.edu and pop your email in there, and you'll get further email updates. And I'm going to drop our evaluation survey in there now that we're wrapping up. Let me get our evaluation survey up. So you have that, and would love to get your feedback, thoughts, ideas. I think in next February, I think I have a speaker for next February who does thermal drone work. He studies deer with the thermal drone, and he's done some really amazing stuff. He's blowing up on YouTube. So I think we might have him in next February, but I'm thinking I might have to make this a twice a month webinar because there's so many good topics coming up. So uh,
Yeah.
I want to say for everybody, I think I'm seeing a lot of thank yous in the chat. Thank you both for joining us. It's nice to hear your expertise and you're sharing this experience, and I think can make a big difference for a lot of things in the landscape. Ev-
Thank you.
Thank you guys. Everybody have a great rest of your day.
Okay. You too.